to deep inside of me, where the sky meets and the sea. Heartbeats blend with oceans roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whispered longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets and the sea. Heartbeats blend with oceans roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and mirrors, soul's desire, burning with a holy fire. Depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems.
Okay, I think we're up and going. I am so sorry. Poor Phil. Actually, I need to give you my number, Phil, because most of the time I was thinking in my head, okay, so I've got time to research now, got the live stream with Phil tomorrow, and at like, I don't know, 10 minutes ago, I get a text from Roddy. He's like, hey, where are you? And I was like, for what? Oh, whoops. So I jumped onto Messenger and I was like, oh, dang. So it's all Will Hess's fault. Somebody clip it and send it to him.
Yeah, I'm happy to blame Will as well.
All right. So, hey, everybody. Welcome to When Deep Calls Deep. I am so excited. I need to fix the title a little bit. We are not going to get to the cup part. That's going to be probably part 3 because of what we were talking about before. There's so much built into this. So we are definitely going to be jumping into liturgy. But first, what I want to do is have, for anybody who doesn't know who this is, and one of my absolute favorite people in the world, have him introduce himself. And he is doing his second takeover of my channel and going to be running the interview again, which was really fun from last time. So, but go ahead, Phil, tell us who you are and what are we talking about today?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Phil Bray. I have the YouTube channel Leviticus is Fun, because it is. And I wrote a book called Leviticus on the Butcher's Block. I think I have one here, which is about Leviticus from the perspective of a butcher, and that's me because I'm a qualified butcher. Yeah, mostly I'm just passionate about talking about Leviticus, but today is liturgy of food, and somehow that's related to Leviticus, but Leviticus finds its way everywhere. So in some way, Leviticus is related to everything in the Bible. Also, Amber says I'm taking over the channel, but really, I think we're just going to have a chat. I've got some questions and a rough outline, but as I chatted to Amber before we started, she revealed that she knows a lot more about liturgy than I even knew was possible. So, and it's going to get deep, I think. I think you're right. We might have to end up doing 3 or 4 parts.
Hey, we embrace the Nathan Jacobs approach around here. We're going to talk about this, and then 6 episodes later, we might be finished. By the time we're done, we don't limit ourselves to a count at the beginning.
Yep. I was writing up my notes and my questions, and I'm like, hang on. That's like a whole other thing that we could talk about. And then I looked at the title and it says cup. I'm like, we didn't think about the cup at all.
No. Yeah, we're definitely going to need, this is probably, you're right, at least a 4-parter on this one.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. When Phil first messaged me about this idea and asking me about the food, and the Old Testament was where it started. And then all of a sudden it was like, and liturgy. And I was like, one of my favorite new topics, liturgy. Love it. This is going to be fun. So I was like, hey, sure, why not? And then I forgot. So here we are half an hour late, getting ready to dive into one of my favorite growing topics here. So, liturgy. Phil, talk us through liturgy and food. What are you thinking? And let's jump into a question.
Yeah. I'll give a bit of background for myself. So I go to an Anglican church, and it's Anglican in name. Well, it's not even Anglican in name. It's called Soul Revival Church, but it's Anglican by tradition. But we've tried to distance ourselves from the whole liturgical prayer book. We kind of we want to be seen as a church that doesn't really follow liturgy. So we don't even recite the Lord's Prayer, which is sad, and we don't recite creeds, which is sad. But what I found, and part of the reason I wanted to chat about it, is I think we filled those holes with other things. So every week our service begins, we've got like a countdown timer on the screen. Every week it's the same song underneath. So people hear the song, they know that it's time to finish their coffee and walk into church. There's always 3 songs to begin, and then there's a confession, and then there's announcements, then there's a sermon, and then there's always 1 song to finish. And then every single week without fail, whoever's doing the church leading will say, and that concludes the formal part of our time together. And that's not written down anywhere, but everyone says the exact same thing. So I suspect that kind of, I don't know if we want to call that liturgy yet, but that'll be one of the questions. What is liturgy? But I suspect liturgy just finds its way into everything that you do, and I don't think that you can escape it. So that's why I think that being really mindful and careful and intentional about liturgy is really important. But I reckon we'll get to that. So yeah, like we said, we're going to talk about liturgy and maybe try and define liturgy first, but then talk about liturgy in the Bible and the liturgy, the food, liturgy of food. And then, yeah, Amber's mentioned some stuff that I didn't even know was liturgical. So hopefully we'll get there as well.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we should start with what does the word liturgy mean?
Right. Well, I mean, actually, I was going to pull up while you were talking. I meant to pull up an actual official definition, and I just was so interested in what you were saying that I got distracted. But I would say, first of all, that when we're talking liturgy, it is really helpful to make a distinction between little L liturgy and big L liturgy. So, because I think you're right, Phil. I think that it's very interesting to me. In the old Protestant context that I used to go to, they're all like, we just kind of, do our own thing and throw our things together and have an order of service. That's a form of a little L liturgy, because that's this established rhythm that is a tradition within so your church has developed their own order of service, their own little liturgy of this is kind of the rhythm of how we do things. And it's cues for people, like you hear this song, it's time to go in because it's time to stop talking and go participate in what's going on in there. And everybody says the same thing at the end. That's our cue that formal time is over. Now we can go back to socializing and go back and get some more of our coffee and donuts. Like there's markers and things that transition us throughout the scheduled time. And there is, and some of it is, sorry, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time, which is never a good idea. Because I can barely talk or type one at a time. So, but it is, so let's see, the Concord, Oxford, I can't see that way over here. I'm going to move that over here. I have this big 3 monitor setup, and if I try to use the one way over there when I'm looking at my camera's over here, it just doesn't work. So the Oxford English Dictionary defines liturgy, and I would say this is a little L version definition of liturgy, is a form or formulary according to which public religious worship, especially Christian worship, is conducted. And then I would say big L liturgy is has two different meanings that aren't different. They're just distinctions. That the big L liturgy is our divine liturgy that we do every time we take the Eucharist, but also the all caps divine liturgy is our experience and our version of eschatology, which is really complicated and breaks people's brains, and I'm still trying to get my head around it, but it's a very beautiful thing that shows, like, well, we can get, that would be a whole episode. That would probably be episode 5, trying to explain that. But it's complicated, but it's beautiful, and it's very much participatory. So I don't want to get too in the weeds of trying to explain that, because that requires a priest and people. It's above my pay grade. So because it's complicated and it's hard to understand. But I think liturgy are those. So if we're going with the small L liturgy, are just markers in our life and in our worship, because it's built into creation. We're going to get into that in a little bit. It's built into creation. So it's not just, I don't want to say not just, I'm going to say it expands our definition of where and how we worship, because there are things built into creation, which, and we see this in the Old Testament. Again, we'll get into this. This is where Leviticus comes in a little bit, a bunch of Exodus, Deuteronomy, gotta love it. The feasts and the festivals are part of the liturgical calendar that we live each year, that helps remind us and put our focus back on God, and trains our hearts to God, which is the whole point of liturgy in the first place.
What do you reckon are maybe some secular forms of liturgy to help distinguish between little L liturgy and divine liturgy?
I think
I was wondering about maybe like singing happy birthday for a birthday party, or blowing out candles, cutting a cake. They're all kind of things that, if they don't happen, like, has it really been a birthday?
Yeah. And we have those things, we kind of build our own schedules, and our own families have our own traditions. So, you kind of get up in the morning and you have things throughout your day that tell you what you're supposed to do next. So you kind of have everybody's schedules are a little different, but you have a basic family rhythm. You get up, you have breakfast, you do what you need to do for a while, you have some lunch, then you do what you need to do for a while, then you have dinner, and then you do what you need to do, and then it's time for bed. That is a form of a scheduled rhythm. So liturgy is rhythm, really. But the actual term liturgy is focused on worship and participation in especially specifically Christian worship. But like, as far as I know, and I'm not an expert, getting into territory that I'm not an expert in, so please go look it up, because I'm probably going to get this wrong, that other religions have in their practices, like meditation is a form of pagan liturgy, because there's things that you do, steps, breathing, all that stuff, that are markers for, as you're participating in their expression of their beliefs, that kind of built in a rhythm to. So liturgy builds in rhythm. It just builds in it. Christian liturgy is meant to help us attune to the heartbeat of God. I think it would be really the best way to explain that. And there is a way to get in tune with the heartbeat and the rhythm of nature, which ultimately is tied to its creator. But not everybody gets there, but they still can attune to the rhythm of the creator through these rhythms that appear in nature, I think.
That's actually great, and that leads into the next question that I wanted to ask. But can we quickly just define maybe big L liturgy, just really simply? From what I looked up, it seems to be something about of the people. I've heard that thrown around, but when I looked it up in biblical dictionaries, it was more like a public service, or like the ancient use of it was a public office or a public service.
Right.
It's even in the Bible, I discovered, which I didn't know the word, the Greek word. Is it liturgia?
Yes, liturgy. Yeah. And it goes, okay, so I guess we'll just jump into the tracing the history of what I understand of how liturgy developed and the kind of the view of that, because it's going to answer your question. It's just going to
Mhm.
take a while to get some of those things. It takes a while to get there. So, because I think where we start is in the book of Genesis. We start with Genesis chapter 1 itself, because you see this thing. There's this pattern of creating space and filling space, but the language that's used there, it's really, really interesting, because you see evening and morning and day 1, evening and morning day 2, evening and morning day 3. So you see this building of days, which I think, because and I'm not the only one, but this is just me being me, that when you see that building in, because that is the Jewish liturgical day. The Jewish liturgical day starts at sundown and then ends at sundown. So our day starts on the clock at midnight and goes to midnight. But for most of us, our body rhythms, it starts when we wake up in the morning, and then it resets every morning when we get up. So, but in the Jewish liturgy, it starts in, which is really interesting because they start at rest. So, and the Eastern Orthodox Church also has the same liturgical rhythm. So our liturgical day starts at evening. So our day starts with the Sabbath of rest, and then you finish the rest of your day getting back to the point where we start the new day and start it with rest, which I find really fascinating. And I haven't had time to get into the why of that exactly yet, but I just really find it fascinating that God starts our day with rest, and then we finish up everything else we need to do. So, but okay, so it's built into creation and that liturgical rhythm, because, it doesn't make sense if you're going to try to claim that that is like 6 actual days, if you build in evening and morning before the sun doesn't even come until day 4. So I think it's just establishing this pattern of rhythm that is, that starts us off, and then you just kind of see it as you're going through the rest of Genesis, that when people stay in the rhythm of following what God tells them to do, things go well with them. And when they don't follow the rhythm, what God tells them to do, because they don't have, Exodus hasn't happened yet, Leviticus hasn't happened yet, Numbers and Deuteronomy haven't happened yet, but somehow they just kind of, Cain and Abel just kind of know that part of participating with God is making an offering. That's not written down anywhere. That's just part of the built-in being in tune with the heart and the rhythm of God is built into creation. So you see that just kind of break down until it's reestablished with the covenant of Abraham. When we start with the covenant of Abraham, and then you get to God gets them set up in Egypt to protect them from the famine and the drought and everything that's coming and that's hit, and that couches us for the Exodus and the birth of the formal nation of Israel. And that in and of itself establishes a whole new existence. And you see in Exodus, it's like, okay, now today is the beginning of your year, and he starts the Jewish clock in the book of Exodus. And that's all done at Mount Sinai. You get the giving of Torah. You get it really blows people's mind that the second half, like a lot of the second half of Exodus and Leviticus, are all happening at the same time. Like those are overlapping on the same day. Like it's quite the banger of a day, right? You get the law.
Yeah, Leviticus is all. Leviticus could be seen as in all one day. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what Leviticus really is God's like, okay, so you get at the end of Exodus, we've got a problem because we've got this great tabernacle. We've got this plan. We're getting set for the road trip that's about to be Numbers, the book of Numbers. And God's going to take them out into the wilderness, and he's going to teach them how to depend on him, restoring their agency, restoring their choice, and restoring a liturgical rhythm. At the end of Exodus, the last thing we see is Moses barred from entering the tabernacle, which is a huge problem because he's got to go in to lead the people and be the intermediary for worship. So Moses and Aaron have to be able to get in there, but nobody can. How do we do that? And God gives them the priest's handbook, which is the book of Leviticus, which all the instructions that we need to maintain a clean, holy space to interact and dwell with God. So it's basically given them the rule book, which is fairly unchanged into the New Testament and even into the liturgy that now we use in the forms of different liturgies that we use in the Orthodox Church. There's not one, like everybody uses the same one. That's not exactly how that works. But they all, you can sit, and if you sit through a divine liturgy, and I just helped write some, because right now my parish is going through the book of Leviticus. So I helped write a Bible study prompts and questions. And so each chapter, we get to certain parts in those chapters in the Bible study guide. I'm like, watch what the priest is doing and how does this match what you're seeing in Leviticus? And it was really, really fun to do that because it kind of helps point out like the stuff that we're still doing that's Leviticus in alive and in motion. So it's pretty awesome. But so that gets established. And then Israel is part of what they're doing out in the wilderness is learning how to live this liturgical document that they've been given. And they're doing it in like boot camp. So, it's a boot camp of trust. It's a boot camp of choice. It's a boot camp of restoring agency and learning how to not be a slave of Egypt in the old and to be dependent on God in the rhythm of the new. And it's really awesome. And then they road test it, the book of Numbers. It goes horribly bad twice. And it shows like what happens when you break out of the liturgical rhythms that God established. It kind of messes you up. Like you're just going against the heartbeat of what was built into creation from Genesis 1. So does that answer?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So then, thinking about one of the differences between an Eastern Orthodox or a Catholic church and your general Protestant evangelical church. So something I heard from Father Stephen de Young a while ago that really, really got me thinking. He was talking about like saints' days and feast days on the annual liturgical calendar. He made the point that in your normal Protestant church, because you don't observe that, you'll end up just using your secular calendar. So on Mother's Day, there'll be a sermon about mothers. And on Father's Day, there'll be a sermon about fathers. And, if something's happened in the news or whatever, you'll end up being defined by the secular calendar and by secular events. So I would love if you could talk about how, or maybe just the difference between having like your Orthodox liturgical calendar and how that kind of forms who you are, and observing saints' days and feasts and whatever, how a divine liturgy, I guess, is different to, the liturgy of the world or the world's calendar.
All right. So this might surprise some people, but just buckle up and hang on with me here for a second. All right. We're going to jump into the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians for this. Now we're looking the narrative of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Yes, I know they're letters, but they still tell a story. Okay. Everything tells a story. Whatever it is, it all tells a story. So we're jumping into 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Now, to step back on this, I really like to kind of explain it this way because it kind of helps people get the context in their head. You've got Paul who's writing letters to these two churches that are an absolute disaster. And so I have this list that I'm working on building of, just punchy titles for the books of the Bible, just to kind of like in one phrase, like here's what this book's about. So 1st Corinthians, I've called it the book of knock it off, right? And then you've got 2nd Corinthians, which is the book of like, really, you're still doing this, right? Okay. So this is what's going on in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. But really what's happening there is a battle for the hearts of Christians in the Corinthian church, because they are going out to their secular culture idols that they came out of. So you got the different Greek god idols and parties and things that are going on there, and then showing up for church to participate in the Eucharist the next morning. And he's like, you've got a divided heart. You've got to pick a lane. You can either be a follower of Christ or you're not. You can't eat from the table of demons and the altar of the Lord at the same time. It makes a divided heart. So you've got to, the 1st and 2nd Corinthians are saying, pick a lane. Don't let that dividedness cause the mess that you're in right now. And I think the same thing, by sticking to a liturgical calendar that is historic, that we have, that starts, starts way back in Genesis, that is continual, that as Christians, we need to define who we are instead of letting the exterior culture define who we are, and bringing in those things. So if you don't have a liturgical calendar that anchors you in remembering Christ and remembering who we are, and those, because one of the many things that those saints' observances do is remind us of how God can change a life. I mean, some of the lives of some of those saints, they were terrible people, and they just went full in on Christ, and it made radical transformations in their lives. And so for us, that's a reminder when we celebrate somebody's feast day, and you go back and you look at their life, and you're like, oh, because there's one that I can't remember his name, and I'll have to go back and correct this later, but just trying to remember one of the stories they told us the other day, when I'm sitting back through listening to catechism, getting to know the new people coming in. They were talking about, there was this one who came in and was repenting. He was a pirate, and he came in and he was also a mercenary, right? So he came in and he starts repenting, and his repentance was so raw and terrible. It lists all this stuff, like he'd murdered people, he'd stolen, he'd done all these terrible like all this stuff, had relations with animals. And then there's this really funny line that says, and other things we can't even record. And I'm like, you just recorded the most horrible things in the world, and there's more that we're not even going to write down. I'm like, wow, this guy was something. And he turned out to be one who was held up as the model of what the change that can be brought about through repentance and participating in the liturgy, because he became like, it was just the story of transformation there was absolutely incredible. When you can go from your sins are too bad, we don't even want to write them down so anybody will remember them, to being, complete the process of sanctification. Like so those are the kinds of things that help us remember to persevere, because things do get brought to completion. Like and all of the feast and fasting schedules help us to remember gratitude. It helps us to remember mercy. It helps us to remember, how Christ walks through us through all of these things, the good, the bad, all of it doesn't. Christ is in all of it, because the things that we do remind us on the liturgical calendar, and not, the federal government saying, today we're carving up turkeys and eating too much. So like, it's just not, it's who you are and where your citizenship is, I guess.
Yeah, and I can't remember where, but in many countries, Father's Day actually is on a saint's day of Father someone. I can't remember who it is, and that makes sense, yeah? Like that Father's Day would be on the day of a saint that you would remember, who was a great father. Can we think about liturgy in the garden? And this is something that I started thinking about a while ago, after Kerry Griffel was talking about it. And I still haven't got to the bottom of it yet, but I would love to think about how Adam and Eve in the garden were living and participating in liturgy, and specifically how the restriction from not eating from one tree, or the command to eat from all the trees, but not the one tree, how that might have been a form of liturgy. And then, of course, we'll have to talk about the seventh day rest in there as well, because I think that's a liturgical form as well. But that all happened before anything went wrong. These are all if you want to call it pre-fall kind of commands or practices. Yeah, have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, I think people have this idea in their head that the pre-fall Eden was just some sort of ultimate self-care, lounge around, do whatever you want, kind of, idyllic existence where there's no responsibility, there's no, you don't have it's perfection. Of whatever their idea of perfection is gets fed back into what is going on in Eden. And I think that there's a couple things going on there. One, there's not just Orthodox theology, because you see this in the Talmud, it's in Jewish rabbinic tradition, it's in several places. There's some secular scholars who have been digging this up and pulling this out lately, that talk about that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of the knowledge of Tov and Ra, wasn't there some kind of a litmus pass-fail test that was like, it's an unpassable test that God put in the garden so that Adam and Eve were gonna mess up, and therefore he's responsible because he put this tree of tempting in there that there was no way they were going to be able to overcome. That's no. Okay, because it's really interesting that you put in the garden the tree of Tov and Ra. Sorry. Oh, I guess. Yeah. Okay, Troy. Yes, you can make fun of me for mispronouncing that Hebrew word there. Okay, the tree of Tov and Ra, and the tree of Ra is put into Eden, but in that form of that pure play, holy place where Adam and Eve were dwelling with God, you can't have evil. So to call it morally corrupt evil isn't really what's going on with that. There, the tree of Tov and Ra becomes the synergistic balance that is the maturation of wisdom. So it is always aligning your choices with the will of God, so that you're never going off in the wrong direction. You're holding those easy and hard things in tension that brings about full wisdom. So Adam and Eve were not created in a place where they were mature enough to hold that tension of the full knowledge of that. So God says, this tree is ripening while you are maturing so that you're ready to eat it. And Adam and Eve are like, think that they get a little over their skis, and Eve lets the serpent convince her that she can shortcut the process and take the wisdom before it's ready and before she's ready. And then she takes it and does the same thing to Adam. Like, look at this. We don't have to do this long, slow process. We can just get it for ourselves. We can be our own gods by taking in wisdom before we're ready for it. And so,
yeah. Do you think that process of approaching every meal with that one little restriction would have been like a liturgical or teaching? Would it have shaped them somehow? Just that that they're living in this garden that God has created for them and placed them in, and yet there's one thing that's off limits. So everything is being given to them, but maybe would it make it more special that they can remember that all this is from God? Because as we approach a meal, we still have to mindfully approach it and think, okay, there's this one that's off limits, and that's going to remind us that God has provided everything else for us.
I think there's some of that, but I also think that people get this idea in their heads that Eden is just some sort of untended, perfect jungle that doesn't require any work. And there's those, like, gardens need tended. He didn't say a tropical wilderness. He said a garden. And that requires work, that requires tending. And you hear a lot in the early church fathers, especially the Cappadocians. I love the Cappadocians. They're my favorites. But they talk a lot about, especially in their monastic practices, that a form of liturgy and a form of worship is work. So doing something with your hands is a part of the liturgical process to bring you through into wisdom, into maturation, and then it's part of theosis or sanctification, is doing work with your hands. And so Adam and Eve are gaining the maturity through the liturgy of work and of abstaining and what's the word I'm looking for? Fasting from wisdom they aren't ready for yet, while they prepare by eating the things that they're allowed to, doing the work with their hands to maintain the garden, that bring and spending time in God's presence, that brings them to maturity to where they're ready to eat that fruit.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, cool. So I just finished reading Drew Johnson's book on what's it called? The law. I can't remember. Drew Johnson book on the law. But he talks about the pattern of all minus one. So he sees the tree and the command to eat from all the trees, the all but one. So everything's yours but one. And he sees a fascinating parallel in the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, where the king of Egypt says, everything is yours but my wife. So everything but one. Then in Exodus, we see the same theme. So he says that with the manna in the wilderness, he says that eat as much as you can collect on every day, except the one day, except on Sabbath. And as well, eat your fill of grapes, as many as you wish. So these are the laws, I think, in Leviticus or Deuteronomy, where it's like, eat your fill of grapes, but don't put any in your bag. Or the poor people, they can take the barley that's fallen on the ground, but they can't put any in their pockets. So that's kind of a habitual practice that I guess would have trained people, that it's given them boundaries, I guess, around that. But can we talk about thinking about that and the manna in the wilderness, and specifically thinking about food? What would liturgy have taught people through that repetition or discipline? What would it have taught them about themselves or their relationship to God?
Well, I think, wow, that's a big question, because if you look at the Exodus, and you're looking at specifically in Numbers is where we see a lot of this, but the instructions are in Exodus, but they're repeated again in the book of Numbers. It kind of showcases how this works. Like, pick up as much as just what you need that day, in the morning and the evening, with the manna and the quail. And except on Saturday, pick up double, because you're not going to do anything the next day, because that's the day that we're going to focus on worship. And I don't want you to worry about working on that day, because that day is solely focused on worship. So you pick a double portion only on that day. And that is a fast from working. And the rest of the days are a fast from overabundance. So that all but one keeps us out of excess and overabundance, and keeps us from taking things that aren't ours. So you see it all over the place, and that's part of things being set apart, things being set aside. So some things are set aside as sanctification for God's use, and some things are set aside as things that are harmful for us, that don't. So like with Joseph and Potiphar's wife, that isn't yours, don't touch it, it's set apart. So Potiphar, Pharaoh, Potiphar, when he sets him over the household, Joseph knows, don't touch that one, because it's not mine. Everything else I'm in charge of, but that's not mine. It's going to harm me if I touch that. So it also builds up our internal resistance to not touching those things that aren't ours, like Potiphar's wife. So if we specifically spend time in the like this is what fasting does as part of liturgy, because it's part of our liturgical practice. So we fast every Wednesday and Friday. Just think for a second. Wednesday and Fridays are we have one set of, there's fasting rules. We're coming up on Lent next month, which is 40 days of vegan fasts and limited quantities of portions of things. And in those, this is what I learned from participating in the Lenten fasting last year. You learned so much about yourself in those seasons of fasting and those things that are set aside as we're going to abstain from these things. You learn a lot about where your shortcomings are. You learn a lot about, here's the weak spots that I have where I need to grow. And it kind of gives you a reset to be like, okay, like I did not horrible last year. I grew in some areas, but I still have some chinks in my armor that I need to like work on. So it kind of gives you a map. And every time we fast, you're wrestling with those weak spots, because it's not just about food, but the church fathers talk about it, because ultimately everything that goes in your mouth, like hunger, is at the root of all sin. It's a hunger for something that isn't ours. And so if you can learn to control your food intake, then you have the will to master the rest of them. So, I mean, does that make sense? Like, food is really important in this whole liturgical conversation, actually.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yep, that's great. Okay, talking about food, can we talk about the peace offering? Because out of all of the sacrifices that were brought, the peace offering is the one that the people or the person bringing the offering would take it back and participate in that food. And something I recently thought about, or kind of just discovered by accident, was that peace offering kind of also fits into that all but one category.
Mm-hmm.
So and when I realized that, it blew my mind a little bit. So say the animal is brought as an offering, as a peace offering, and then God gets his bits, and no Israelite was allowed to eat any of the fat or the kidneys or the liver.
Mm-hmm.
And then the priests got some, so they got the breast and the thigh. But then the offerer took the rest home. So that's kind of an all but one. But even in that practice, that would have communicated to them that God gets the best bits of my offering. The priests also get the good bits, not the best bits, but the good bits. And then we take the rest home, and we're all participating together in a meal. So I guess this is kind of where I want the conversation to head. If we're talking about like what would that mean? And I'm sure there's so much in there that we just don't understand in our kind of modern Western culture, but I'm sure that would have shaped them and their view of God and their identity as a community of God's people.
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on there. I think, again, you got to go back to the Exodus and the numbers and the wandering in the desert, because they are learning dependence on God's provision. So now that we have moved into with Leviticus, and we've got structure. God's at the top. The priests are in the middle above the people, because they are the mediator between God and the people. And then you got the people down here. So God's like, with these peace offerings, you can give me the best part and honor the priests who I have set apart with another part, but I'm still going to provide enough for you. So you're still going to get enough. And that's, and is because in Torah is built in, is built in that we are supposed to care for the poor, the widow, the foreigner, there's all those categories that need to be cared for. If what you're given back, you can't eat with just your family, you're supposed to invite those people in so that they're also cared for. And so if you have any left, it's to your shame, because you weren't generous and you weren't doing what God intended by taking care of those who are less fortunate than you. So if somebody can't bring a peace offering because they can't afford a lamb or a sheep or, anything like that, they're not left out either, because they still get to participate by getting invited into a family to share the meal that is provided there with that offering.
Yeah, that's great. And then that's actually that was my next question. The reason for the expiration date, because that seems to be to have a similar kind of value, where the peace offering had I think a 2-day expiration date. The manna in the wilderness and the quail had an expiration date. And the Passover, that I want to talk about next, had an expiration date as well. But do you think that ties into the idea of not taking too much, or not inviting enough people, not looking after the poor?
Yeah, I think it gets us out of Costco mindset. If I've got Costco, I don't need God, because Costco, I can go buy 8 months worth of food, and I don't have to worry about where it's coming from, how I'm going to eat for the next 8 months. But if all I get is for today, how am I going to eat tomorrow? I can either worry about it, or I can trust God's proof of every day providing what I needed, because every day there was manna, every day there was quail. And, with the sacrifices, every peace offering, like their needs, when they participated, their needs were always met.
Yeah, that's great. And that reminds me of the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. So you're asking just for today. Just give me enough for today.
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't there a proverb as well? Don't give me so much that I would not rely on you, and don't give me too little that I'll become bitter. Something like that.
It's possible.
Proverb,
That's behind the condemnation of the guy who builds the bigger barns. Why are you hoarding what you have? Why are you being greedy? Why are you hoarding what you have?
All right, let's talk about Passover, because that, out of all the meals, that seems to be, if any meal in the Bible was going to be a liturgical meal, I would think that the Passover is. Maybe, so the Passover starts with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and there's a whole lot of instructions around that. And then Exodus 12, God tells the people, this is before they've left Egypt, but I think this is the setup to what the liturgy and what the Passover meal will look like as part of their annual feast. But he says, you're to keep this command as a permanent statute for your descendants when you enter the land that the Lord your God will give you. You are to keep this service. And I imagine that is a way of saying you're to keep this liturgy. And so then when your children ask, what does this service mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians and spared our homes. So that seems to be a liturgical question that's written in to the process of, I imagine like some child would be like, okay, it's your turn. You got to ask the question. And then the elder of the household would explain what it means and what the meal means. Is that what you see going on?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is where it's the same thing that's built into the Shema, because it's not a checklist of rules to teach your kids. It's teaching your children to contemplate about God, as all those reminders of the Shema are built into the liturgy of their day. So let me pull that up, because my brain was full of the incarnation before we started. And so that's where I'm still trying to pull my brain out of the incarnation and into the Old Testament. So, so Deuteronomy 6, good grief, 4 through 9. my Deuteronomy professor screaming at me right now, I think. Okay. So, and he sets it up. Hear, O Israel, hear our Lord, our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, with your whole soul, and your whole power. So these words I command you today shall be in your heart and your soul. You shall teach them to your sons and talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and shall be immovable from your eyes. You shall write them on your doorposts, on your houses, and on your gates. So, go back and let's think about this for a second of what actually the Shema is doing. Yes, we're supposed to teach them, but we do it with our lives and with our integrated self, which is what those three distinctions are. But you do that. How do you do that? When you sit in your house and when you walk by the way. So when you're sitting down and when you're walking around. So when you're at home or when you're out everywhere else you're going. Okay. Because they walked everywhere. They didn't have cars. Most of them didn't have donkeys or anything like that. You're just walking all over the place. Okay. So when you lie down and when you rise up. So when you go to bed, when you get up in the morning, like that, that's the liturgical day of Israel. Evening, like you go to bed in the evening, that's the start of your liturgical day. And then on your hand and before your eyes, which means in everything that you're doing and seeing, because everything they did was with their hands. They weren't, voice typing or, like calling people on the phone. There was physical labor. Things had to be built. They were, this is nomadic existence with old school stuff that you didn't just call DoorDash and dinner appeared. Like you actually had to make the furniture you were sitting on and make your own clothes. Like everything was done with your hands. And then everything, had to be, so everything that you saw too, because there were markers that were built in as reminders. And then write them on the on the doors of your houses and on your gates. So when you go home and when you leave, you can go somewhere else. So everything you do, every part of your life is baked into the Shema to be a reminder to turn your heart to think about God. It's a liturgical, it's a liturgy prayer is what it is.
So that just made me think of icons, or a crucifix, or even making the sign of the cross when you see a crucifix. That, I guess that's exactly the same thing, yeah. So when they wake and when they lie down, that was their cue, or when they're walking, that's their cue to remember. But when we see an icon or when we see a cross, that's our cue. Is that? I mean, yeah. I don't go to to a Catholic or an Orthodox church, but the more I discover about it, the more it seems like a really beautiful habit.
That's one of the many things that they do are visual reminders. They also teach us theology, and there's a whole lot more to it than that. But yes, they are. So like our parish just finished a year-long project covering the inside walls and ceilings with beautiful icons. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I saw photos. It is beautiful. Yeah.
Everywhere we look. Actually, last night I was just after liturgy. It was before liturgy started. And a friend of mine came in and I was sitting in the front row, and from where I was sitting, I could see there was the nativity and the baptism of Jesus, the crucifixion, and the harrowing of Hades. And I'm like, I'm sitting here and I am looking at my thesis on the walls. Like I'm just contemplating the story that's going on in all those icons. Like it was incredible to just sit and soak that in as part of those visual reminders to interact with on a higher, deeper level than just reading the story or, like it. Yeah, it definitely pulls you into the experience of participating with God with those reminders. Yeah, for sure.
So then I guess like that also feeds into what we were talking about setting aside a time and intentionally setting aside a time, even if it's the setting aside a day of the week, because if you don't, then the things like the radio in your car will be the thing that prompts you, or it will be, your event on the weekend or your cafe on the weekend will be the thing that prompts and forms your identity, rather than you sitting there, being surrounded by these icons and beautiful paintings.
Well, and I think back to your much earlier question, Phil, about the calendars and why the liturgical calendar is important, because this is the thing right here. We set aside an intentional day that is specifically for worship. So it's different from our regular rhythm. But because we have that in place, it's this, and you see this struggle a lot in the church and people's lives. And this is a real difficult struggle for people, because we want our kids to participate in extracurricular activities, and we want to do well and provide well for our families. And we want to, be involved in all of these things. And then your schedule can get so crowded that we get so exhausted that now I don't feel like going to church. I'll just stay home and watch the live stream. I'm not showing up because my kids have soccer on practice on Sunday mornings. I'm not showing up because, so then the external secular calendar starts dictating our religious, our personal worship and our personal interaction and our personal devotion time and our personal relationship with God. And God gets booted for all these other things that are crowding out our schedules and taking away all of our energy and draining out our life. So, and I'm not saying if you don't put your kids in soccer. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying this is about learning that balance of that tension of staying focused on God, but not letting the world tell you who you are. And it's a very hard, delicate balance, and people need a lot of compassion because it's rough. It's a hard thing.
Why then do you think that the evangelical church has reacted against liturgy, or the Protestant evangelical church?
Okay, so
just a little question to throw in.
I can only really speak from what I experienced and the change that I made. I come out of the Restoration movement, which started in 1790, 1820. They can't seem to make up their minds what the date of that is exactly. But they taught things like creeds are divisive, and they cause disunity by enforcing a creed, and that liturgy is just a set of rules that you use to earn your salvation with. And so it's not biblical to earn your salvation. And that that is the church telling you what to believe and how to think. And if you have the right of private interpretation of Scripture, then that goes against your right to personal private interpretation of Scripture. So I can't just believe whatever I want because I thought it up in my brain as I was studying a passage. They removed the guardrails. And so then you can kind of get a lot more room and freedom to do things the way that we think that they should be done, instead of in the heartbeat of God's intended dwelling, I guess is how I want to try to be very careful here, because I just know from my own personal experiences. And now, like, I went to a Protestant Christmas Eve service, and as I was sitting through that, to me, because I find where I'm at now so nourishing and so meaningful, and the structure and the liturgy and everything that we do and the way that we do it is, to me, I have never felt so connected ever. Sitting through that Christmas Eve service felt empty, and it felt disconnected of the life that I live in now in the Orthodox Church. But I don't know how else to.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to ask next. Is my question that I had written down is liturgy beautiful? But I guess and I haven't experienced it in the same way that you have, and I feel like it's a bit of a hole in my life. Like it's it's a grief. But I've come to realize that I think there's something about liturgy that can teach and shape us in a way that a sermon or a book just can't do. So are you able to talk about that? Like, what is it about liturgy and participating in liturgy that listening to a sermon or reading a book just is incapable of doing?
I think there's a couple things, and I'm gonna use two different ways to do this, because there's the liturgy service that we sit in, and then there is the sacramental life that is in and of itself a bigger form of liturgy. So it doesn't all stop; it's all connected in a bigger structure of refocusing your entire life. Okay, so while I'm sitting in liturgy itself, there is a lot of things that are going on there, because we've got, there's points where he comes out and uses the censer with incense. And that to me is a sensory anchoring that just kind of helps me like refocus it. And because everything is spoken and chanted on a certain rhythm, that helps regulate the nervous system, but it also creates a shared cadence for everybody all throughout the entire service. So it's not just 3 wildly emotional songs and then listening to some guy for 45 minutes that doesn't have, we're connected to the same heartbeat for the whole 2 hours, because our liturgies are like 2 hours long. And so, which to me, I love it, but it's, it's an interconnected, rhythm that we all experience together at the same time. And because it's, it is predictable, but it's also interchangeable parts depending on the time of the year and what we're celebrating and what we're focusing on and what we're learning. It will hold my interest because there's always something different, but it's always familiar. So there's familiar pieces that I can do in my sleep, and I always know where we are in the service because it becomes so familiar. But what that does for me is it creates a predictability that allows me to not have to wonder what's coming next, so I can fully just immerse myself in what's happening. And when we do like the section it's called the litany, it is this cycle of the priest or the deacon will read something to pray about, and then the congregation will participate in with Lord have mercy. And so you've got this string of all these, here's the thing we're praying for, Lord have mercy on that. Here's something we're praying for, Lord have mercy on that. And that is a form of communal prayer and worship. But one of the things that I didn't expect, and one of the things that I learned, my version of my definition and my understanding of mercy was way too small. And just thinking through everything we were praying through in those litanies and everything saying, Lord have mercy for that. Maybe my definition of mercy is way too small. And so I learned to experience a bigger understanding of God's mercy just by sitting through and listening to the litanies and participating in the litanies and praying for mercy for that. And I'm just so, it really gives a common language to everybody. So when you throw out, like in my upbringing, you throw out creeds, if you throw out all the councils, if you throw out ecclesiastical structure, you don't have a common language. You don't have a unifier to even speak the same language, even in your own church, because my version of mercy could be 89 degrees away from your, understanding of mercy, and everybody's got their own private dictionary. And how do we know if we're even talking about the same thing? So it gives you a common language. So every service, we say the creed. Before we take the Eucharist, we say the creed, we say the Lord's Prayer, and then we have the prayer of the communicant to participate in the Eucharist. And every single time you say those 3 things together, and it brings a unity of language that I didn't have before. So everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, on a personal note for me, my a couple of my kids are on the autism spectrum, and we learnt, I wouldn't say early on, not early enough, about a thing called is it a mind map or it's a map where that you set the expectation of what's going to happen. So
Mm.
for us, that's really important for church, that they know what's going to happen. And so when it's school holiday time or a different service, or there's, say, a baptism, or it's a Christmas service or something, that's when my kids will freak out, because they don't know what's coming next, and they'll have a meltdown, and we'll get to the end of the day thinking, why did we come? Like, it's just so unpredictable, and they can't handle it. Like,
Mhm.
they actually physically and mentally need, it's like a safety thing. They need to know what's coming. And our church isn't the best at doing that, but I imagine that, like a highly liturgical church, you would know, like every week, you'd know what's coming next, even if it's in a different language.
Mhm.
I've heard people talk about that. They go to a
Uh-huh.
different country, they go to church or mass or whatever, and they know exactly what's happening, even though they can't understand what's being said. And for that, every week, like that would start to form part of who you are. And if
Mhm.
you're someone like my kids, who they can't concentrate for even an hour, and they feel, I don't want to say unsafe, but they don't feel comfortable if they don't know what's going to come, or what's
Mhm.
coming next, or if there's going to be any surprises. Um, so for them, having the kind of regular, even annual things, so every Easter, every Christmas, if you're like, like, I remember this, like, I know what's coming. This is that beautiful part of the sermon
Mhm.
or the service. Um, yeah, I think that can be a really beautiful thing. Um, do you want to talk about the Eucharist, or fasting before the Eucharist?
We could, I guess, we could go in there because it's a big part of it too. But that is also a part of what you were talking about with this, because we know everything that's coming.
Mm,
It makes it so there's days where, if I've had a rough week, or if I've had a really good week, or there's, really, like, there's a big thing, I can sit in liturgy and I'm still participating, even if I can't focus and I can't be
mm,
there. I know the words. Those songs are familiar. Those hymns are familiar. Those chants are familiar. Those, like, I always know when I'm ready, I can jump right into the service whenever and be ready to jump right in, because I'm like, as soon as he stands up and says, says Sophia Orphai, or, wisdom, stand up right, depending on which deacon is doing it. I'm like, okay, I know exactly what's coming now. I can start paying attention, or, like, it kind of helps. Like, there's a lot of those cues in there, so you can participate, like, tune in and out as you need to. I mean to
mm,
say it that way,
yeah.
but, and the Eucharist is another big piece of that, and fasting for the Eucharist. So we fast for the Eucharist for a couple reasons. One, because it helps us, um, wrestle with those sins that are always before us. So those things that I still struggle with, whenever I fast, come in, and are brought up to my attention. And that gives me, when I get to the part of the prayer of the communicant, and you're like, okay, forgive me for those sins, intentional and unintentional. And you're like, oh yeah, that whole thing that I was just wrestling with all morning, I should probably make sure and include that in this prayer. But we also fast because, um, if you've eaten right before you take the Eucharist, that's going to, I don't want to, how do I say this? Be a diluter of the whole point of the Eucharist. It's going to just melt in with the rest of the contents of your stomach, and because we believe that it is the miracle of the body and blood of Christ, and that when you participate in the Eucharist, so think about it this way: like, you are what you eat, right? So if I'm eating, Christ is being internalized in me, that makes a difference. And that I can't, this is one of those things, I can't even try to explain this. And I would say, go, if you want to know, go talk to a priest, because they'll do a whole lot better than I can. But my myself, me, since I was received into the church and started participating in the Eucharist, stuff has been healed and things are just different for me in a way that I can't explain any other way than participating in the Eucharist. It has no words. It's unexplainable other than you are what you eat. And if you're eating a symbol reminding you of a thing, you become a symbol reminding you of a thing. If you're eating the real presence of Christ and participating in the real presence of Christ, then you're becoming more like the real presence of Christ. Like it physically changes the spiritual existence or your participation in I can't, like I said, please go talk to a priest because there's no way I can explain that at all. I just know for me, it is very true. And so if there is any possible way I can get to a liturgy service, I get to one because it has become so significant as a part of my week to participate in that. And there's something so beautiful about all of the imagery and symbolism and stuff that I can't articulate or explain that's going on there that makes it different.
Yeah, that's great. Especially when you said that you can't even explain it. But maybe that's the whole point of liturgy, is that it's something that can't be explained. Like you can't read a book on it. You can't hear a lecture on it, and like that's not the thing that's going to make sense to you.
And I think just really quickly, Phil, I want to just kind of touch on this too. Another reason for me why it's so amazing and unexplainable as part of liturgy, because of the way that we believe in the eternal now, and that there is a divine liturgy that happens in heaven that is one service that's always happening. So there's one eternal liturgy. And that's in what we call kairos, the Greek word kairos, which is a different form of time than chronos. So that every time we participate in the chronos liturgy services, we get to participate in the kairos. So think about it this way. So me in Portland and my friend Joshua Sherman in Colorado and my friend Troy in Texas and my friend Courtney in North Carolina, even though we're all in different time zones, when we are participating in the divine liturgy in our churches, we are doing that together, standing together, shoulder to shoulder. So it breaks down time and space barriers so we can worship together in a very real way that also I can't explain other than I've experienced it. So it connects us on an even bigger level, that we can do these things together, but actually do them together and not just, isn't that nice? We did it across. So, if you were to go and participate in a liturgy, you and I could be doing that together at the same time, even though you're in Australia and I'm in Portland, because of the way we believe liturgy is happening in the kairos, and we experience it breaks down chronos time, if that makes any sense at all.
It doesn't make sense, but I believe you. I wonder if that feels like it connects back to the sacrifices in Leviticus, where what they were doing on earth, kind of as the smoke ascended, they knew that they were participating with the divine. So it was like that vertical connection. The meal that they were having down here was connected to God via the smoke, and it's the same meal that they're having. So and what you're saying is that the participation here is in a sense a real participation with the divine.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. You nailed it. That's exactly what's going on.
So, I still don't understand it, but yeah. So I can't remember who said it. Might have been Father Stephen Damick, one of them, or some other philosopher, don't know, about that you believe what you experience rather than believing kind of what you're told. So even you might know that smoking is bad for you, but you don't really know that smoking is bad for you until you've got lung cancer or lung disease. And that's why you don't stop. And so you can listen to someone telling you that God loves you, but you don't know that God loves you until you experience it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, are you able to talk about how liturgy or even the Eucharist or food might help
Mhm.
through that experience to communicate something that actually makes us know something or helps us know something that we can't know in any other way?
Yeah. Okay. So you've hit on one of my favorite epistemology topics here. Oh boy, you're hitting all my favorite ones today, Phil. Let me tell you. Okay. So in 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 the Enlightenment and moving forward, what the Reformation and the Enlightenment movement did, and the bringing in of that epistemology and the scientific method, we've kind of absorbed it into our brains that there are two kinds of knowing things, that there is an objective reality and a subjective reality. And if it's not an objective reality, if it's not scientifically proven that it's replicatable scientific testing, then it has to be subjective. And everything we categorize in those two categories, which is definitely not the way that reality works. Okay, right? So all right, so Phil, let's say you finally, like, I finally get to come visit you, right? And there is some Australian food thing that I have never had before. I have no idea what this thing is. And you're going to, like, give me the scientific report of here is what this thing is. So it's got all the ingredients in it. It's got the, the nutritional breakdown. It's got all that. This is scientifically what this thing is. Okay. We'll use Vegemite. We're going to cheat because I've had it before, but we'll just use Vegemite because that's a very Aussie thing, right? So I knew. So here's the jar. Here's here's what it is because here's what's in it, right? But that doesn't really tell you what it is. It tells you what its chemical makeup and nutritional makeup is. All right. But that doesn't tell you if you like it or not. Whether you like it or not is subjective to every person because some people like it, some people really don't. Like Vegemite doesn't have very many people in the middle. It's one of those like divisive things, I think. I had a roommate who was Australian, so this is how I know this. Okay. So, but it doesn't, but whether I like it or not doesn't tell me what it is. Right? The only way I can know what Vegemite is to put some of that in my mouth and experience it. And you definitely know what Vegemite is once you put that stuff in your mouth. Like you definitely do. And that's an experience that will tell you because of the scientific makeup, and it will kind of inform the subjective. Those are side knowledges that contribute to the experience learning that you get from experiencing the thing instead of just learning about the thing. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't put a whole spoon of Vegemite in your mouth because no one's going to like that. But on toast with a lot of butter, more butter than Vegemite, it's amazing.
Oh no, my Aussie roommate gave me a spoon of it, and she's like, "Here, try this," and I was just like,
no.
"What kind of road tar is this that she
Yeah.
just gave me?" I was so scarred. I will probably never try Vegemite again. Anyway,
No, you
but
just want a hint with a lot of butter on bread.
But anyway, that's just kind of the basic idea that experiential learning is also the more permanent form of learning because you internalize it. So I have broken it, I have taken it apart, I have played with it, I have eaten it and been scarred for life because of it. Like, it is that kind of learning that where God wants to dwell with us because we are experiencing him through the liturgy, experiencing him through the Eucharist, experiencing him through the fasting, through the prayers, through all of the pieces of the sacramental and part of the calendar, because we're experiencing him through all of those, the a lot of those are the Old Testament festivals that have been preserved and moved over. So you've got the Feast of Tabernacles and like all those things that are God's experiential learning, remembering what God has done by re-experiencing them over time.
Yeah, and I don't know how many ancient Israelites could read, but I imagine that not many, and I imagine that they would learn, and that they would learn about God and His character through participating in the ritual or the meal or the sacrifice or whatever. They didn't learn about God from reading a Bible because they didn't have one. But they probably knew God and God's character in a way that we just can't know, because I guess they were closer in a sense. Actually, maybe that's not true, but in a different kind of way.
I think in a different kind of way, because I
Yeah.
think that they also held something that modern Americans have a hard time with, because we are so distracted to death with everything and so dependent on the written word, and have elevated the written word to a certain point of unhealthiness, that we forget that these are oral based cultures with oral based traditions. And that's the liturgy is very much oral based, because there's a lot of spokenness to it. There's a lot of repeating, there's a lot of responding. But they carried their tradition and they wrote down enough to preserve the oral tradition so that people would remember, because they wrote down the cliff notes of enough of the story that would be held over through the passing down of the tradition. But a lot of them didn't have, every Jewish household didn't have a complete collection of the Old Testament, because they were living through the writing of the thing, right? They didn't, they didn't get the book of Joshua and they're like, spoiler alert, don't read the end, like kind of thing. They didn't have that. So they had the stories that they would tell each other as they were moving around. And then when they started settling into more permanent areas, gathering together in families and tribes and for celebrations, retelling each other these stories to preserve the memory and to re-participate in those stories through the oral storytelling. Because, like with your kids, you probably noticed, Phil, I would say that they do better when they can interact orally with a story, because sitting down to focus to read is extremely hard.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Well, that's something else I wanted to ask is, have you had any experience with people who maybe have a learning disability or a mental illness that actually can't take in information from a sermon? Like, I imagine that kind of person who might have a cognitive disability, like they're not going to learn anything from a sermon, and they're not going to learn anything from coming to my church. But do you think that they could experience God in a way by coming to a divine liturgy?
Yeah, I mean, I have ADHD, and so we've got a 15-minute homily, and the rest of it is all in like changing, participating, active participation parts. And so my ADHD, I check in and out as I have capacity during the service. Some days it's better, some days it's worse, but I still know what's going on because I've been there long enough that I'm familiar with the whole thing. So I always know what's going on, even if I'm disconnected. Or there's some days where I have, sorry, I got distracted for a second there, where I have sat next to a friend, and because I still sometimes struggle with seasonal depression, I've just cried through the whole service, but I still know what's going on because it's familiar. So I'm in tune with it on a certain level, and I am, but I might not be able to participate. So the building of the familiarity adds to be able to participate even when there's something blocking the direct ability to participate. So like there's mornings where sometimes I don't even have the energy to get up and read and do my prayers and use my prayer book. But I have, because of my ADHD and some other things, I have audios of everything because it's easier for me to take it in by listening to it than by reading it. And so I will just turn my prayer book on and listen and let the prayer book's words, familiarity, and everyone else who's praying those pray for me, because it's always going to hit on something that I'm going through, giving voice to something that I can't express, and giving me a way to participate when I wasn't able to do that. So, yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, that's even beautiful as it is. And you've told me before about how having written prayers helps you able to pray in a way where you're kind of living in a different part of your mind, where you don't have to invent prayers, but you can kind of just relax into the prayers because you know and you trust them. Do you maybe want to mention something about that?
Sorry, repeat. Say that again. I got distracted.
Sorry.
ADHD blip there.
You mentioned before that you've come to really like your morning and evening prayers because it allows you to, you don't have to invent prayers yourself, that you know and you trust the prayers from the prayer book or whatever. You shared the book with me. But yeah, are you able to share how having regular written prayers changes the way that you pray? Because is it a different part of your mind that you're using?
Mhm. I think, and so there's two parts to that. First of all, some people get the idea that we're not allowed to pray except with the prayers written in the book, that's the only thing you can do. That's, the prayers help us to train our hearts to know how to respectfully pray and interact in respectful prayer, and giving us the words and teaching us the language of prayer. But we are also allowed spontaneous prayer. So I can, I can use both. I can use one, I can use the other. Like I have the freedom to do both. But there are some days where there is so much, whatever it is, good, strong emotion, or there is so much of other things that are hang on.
Are you
Sorry.
dealing with the chat?
Yes, I am. I'm dealing with the chat. Sorry. I'm not going to tolerate that kind of thing in my channel.
Yep.
So anyway, that when I don't have words for, whether it's sadness or confusion or joy or, whatever it is, if I don't have words for it, I have just learned through experience that something in the written prayers is going to be, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was feeling. And there's been times where I read through like one of the prayers of lament, and I'm like, wait a second, I was really angry about this thing, but actually what I'm doing is I'm grieving and lamenting this other thing. And it's like, oh, now I understand what that is, what that feeling is, or what that thought is, or where, so it has helped teach me about myself.
Yeah, cool. It's coming up to an hour and a half. Do you want to think about a part 2 and a part 3? Because I know you've got a thesis to write, and we've got another chat that we need to have as well.
Yes, we do. So we can wrap this one up, and we will definitely have a couple more parts of this one.
Yeah, I was almost going to ask you about as we fast and have the Eucharist, and is that participating with Jesus in his earthly life? But I figured that would be too big of a question, and we should save that one.
That's an incarnation question, and that is its whole other video.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's a teaser then.
Yes, we are going to get into incarnation. We're going to get into, there's all kinds of things. We're going to get into cups and the significance of cups and what those mean. And we're going to there's a whole lot of stuff that we still, we haven't even touched coffee hour, because there's a whole theology about coffee hour that we haven't gotten into yet either. So we have much more territory to cover that we're not going to get to this time. So I just want to, just before you wrap us up, Phil, because I just want to kind of go back and say that as our visitor that I've removed from our chat so kindly pointed out, not everybody has space in their theology to participate with something outside their experience. And I think that stepping into something with a prejudice that doesn't allow you to even consider some of those, especially ancient traditions, I think for me makes me sad for that person and those individuals like that. And I used to be in that camp. I grew up in a movement that was very much everything that I do and believe now, to them, I'm a heretic that's going to hell. End of story. No way around it. And that makes me very sad that is that reality. And I think that opening your mind isn't going to make your brain fall out of your head. How about that?
Yeah, I think there's a real fear, I think.
Mhm.
There's a fear that experience will open you up to something that's not biblical somehow. Like there's such this don't quote me on this, but I think there's such almost a worship of the cognitive. Like we just worship the brain so much that the most important thing in many Protestant churches is the sermon, which is basically a like a lecture, which is like my kids can't understand that. Like it's basically only for the cognitive or the elite that can kind of understand that, and it's only one little part of the brain that you're reaching. But it sounds like a liturgy. It speaks to all the senses, like your smell, your taste, your sight,
Visually with
sound,
the
like
things
everything
that are on
visual.
your yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I just know that no matter what kind of day I have or what kind of day I'm having, every time I walk into St. George's, I settle into an unexplainable peace. My stress level drops measurably and I can breathe automatically, just because because of what I have learned and what I have learned to live there, that it is, to me, a retuning of a deep experiential relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And I like the difference between churches that I've been to that are like that whole thing of like 4 bare walls and a sermon. So I've been to churches seriously where they intentionally remove anything that they think might be distracting. So they will intentionally remove artwork. They don't want stained glass windows or anything because that will distract from the main thing up the front, which is the sermon. So yeah, it's kind of sad.
But and we believe in, as part of the liturgy, that it is the break so that you can sit down and it's not a stop of worship. It's just a break of a different mode, but it's kept short. So I've heard more than one priest say, if I go for more than 15 minutes, you have my permission to call the bishop and tell him that I talk too much. like it's short and very much intentionally, because it's a rest from the active rhythm that is a lot of work. So not works as in you're earning your salvation, but all that standing and chanting and singing, and it's very physically participation. So it does. So they give you a break and let you sit down for 12 to 15 minutes. And a good priest will tell you, if I talk too much, call the bishop.
Yep. And that nicely ties us back to the very beginning, that participation is what liturgy is. Yeah. It's the people participate. It's not one person up the front telling you what to do. It's the people who are doing the liturgy. Is that right? Actually, that's a good question. Is Is it the people who do the liturgy, or is it the priest who does the liturgy, or is it a bit of both?
Actually, it is the people in the choir who are leading the liturgy, and the priest is doing his part in participating through the prayers that he does and in preparing the Eucharist. And so everybody has their own part participating. It's not just, certain people doing certain things. And so it is, he has his part, we have our part, and it's all active participation.
Troy's just showed up. He's very late.
His ears were probably burning because we were talking about him earlier. But
yeah, I reckon that's a great place to end. Thanks, Amber.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to parts 2, 3, possibly 4, maybe 5. Yeah. However many parts this goes, we will take the space that it needs to take, because around here, like, this is one of the beautiful things about not caring about the algorithm and not caring how big my channel is, because I can do what I want. I don't have to worry about my algorithm. I don't have to worry about, I just talk about stuff that's interesting, and if people come watch it, people come watch it, and if they don't, they don't. Like, it's just the beauty of the freedom of not caring, I guess. So, all right, everybody. Phil, tell people where to find you, and then we will close down and move on to the next the next thing.
Hey, Troy. You can find me in Sydney, Australia, but I'm not going to tell you exactly where I live. I'm on Leviticus is Fun on YouTube. Been working my way through Leviticus, currently up to chapter 12, which is exciting. And you can find my book, Leviticus on the Butcher's Block, pretty much everywhere, even in random places like Dick Smith. It's weird.
I've been loving, yours is one of those, like, there's not a lot of YouTube channels that I watch anymore, and yours is one of the ones that I actually do watch. I don't comment much, but I do watch. I do, and I send people to your stuff all the time, because I do. You and Spencer probably have my 2 favorite channels on YouTube, actually, which is part of why I have you guys on so much, because I just love you guys, and we love to talk about the same nerdy things, so it makes it a lot of fun. So
there's a lot of shared nerdiness between us. Yeah.
Except you guys are wrong about Ezekiel. However, I'm about to throw the whole war into a whole new level of something by changing my mind that we're all wrong, and that Baruch is the best book of the Old Testament.
Okay.
Because I'm just about there to throw the whole rubric upside down on its head. Because, like, so as far as what's coming up on my channel, I have absolutely no idea. I have to finish the chapter 3 and chapter 4 by the 1st, and then rewrite and compile and turn in the entire thing by March 1st, not May 1st, March 1st. And then the last week of March is my oral defense against 3 of the nicest, scary people in the universe. So I have a lot of stuff to do. So it'll be very hit or miss on what I actually am putting out and squeezing in for a stress break, because that's kind of what these are mostly just stress breaks. So my stuff will be very inconsistent for the next couple months, and then I'll have more time to do. And I have it on good authority, which is mine, that a certain person in the chat has said that once I turn my thesis in, he will join me on in the video that we will hopefully put out, which will be awesome to have that, because that'll be a lot of fun and good motivation to actually get the thing done and turned in. But yeah, that's kind of where that is. And
did you still, were you planning on rescheduling the Garments of Skin chat?
Yes, that one we will reschedule, because that one is important, and that's comes out of my thesis research. So that one isn't a whole lot of mental work for me.
You've already done the research.
Done all the research. Yep. Yes. Yep. So that's an easy one. I can do it off the top of my head pretty well too, because I pretty much eat, breathe, and live the Garments of Skin right now, because it's a major part of all the chapters of my thesis. So that one's an easy one. So we will have that one coming out too. And But thank you, Phil, for another channel takeover here, because it was a really fun conversation, I think. And I think one of the things that I love to do, especially, is to try to reconsider things, because there's a lot of enchantment and wonder and mystery to scripture that has been lost. And so trying to reclaim that by looking at how wonderful and amazing the narrative is, and looking at what a beautiful picture that participation in this narrative really brings out, and tapping into that. So, just waking up to that mystery that's waiting for us in the narrative is such a beautiful thing. And liturgy is one of those things that helps us do that. So thank you all. God bless. Phil, definitely looking forward to several more. We also need another Why Leviticus Matters, because I want to go into why the Eucharist is in it's in Leviticus, because it is, and get into Jesus in Leviticus. What are you talking about? Which is also, by the way, in chapter 3 of my thesis. I put that in there, just a little yay, Phil, kind of unofficial nod in my thesis, Phil, that in there for Leviticus. So, but thank you all for taking some time out of your afternoon to jump in and join us. And we will see you with the next one. Go and be blessed.